you know, the last night I spent with Mary, and she had so many stories, incredible stories about celebrities and diplomats and politicians, and I wanted to see if we could get through a couple of them at the beginning, because it's such an interesting perspective on people that we've seen only in magazines and newspapers and TV. And Mary, you spent a majority of your childhood between Gettysburg and the White House. And so that, I think, begs the question, what does one get the President of the United States for Christmas?
Well, I think that's a good question, because he had enough Old Spice, you know? But there was nothing left to buy him at that point. So my mother, who was a very clever person, decided that we were going to put on a Christmas pageant for him. And she took regular bed sheets and cut holes out of the middle and then laced the holes with garland. So that was our costume. And then she made big cardboard angel wings, you know, with the glitter and the whole bit. And they were stapled onto the back of the outfit. Then she took coat hangers and made halos out of them. And she draped them with garland and twinkle lights. Then she ran the wires from the twinkle lights down our arms, and she had D batteries that were disguised as candles, and there was a button on the bottom that we could press, and it would make the lights flash. So on the second floor living quarters of the White House has an oversized corridor. It's probably about as large as, I'd say, the two rooms, actually, maybe 1.5. So we started at the West Wing and proceeded singing Silent Night and various other carols to the East Wing in the dark, and you know, our little halos twinkling and all that. And I'm sure with 4 kids, you know, 1 boy and 3 girls, that was about as angelic as we got at one time. But anyway, when it was over, the lights went on, and Granddad jumped out of his seat and he said, "Wow, this is so much better than the theater." He gave each of us $1. So.
No doubt you saved those halos.
On Christmas instead of him.
No doubt you saved those halos for when you misbehaved, right? You just hit the button, and it's hard to punish someone with a halo. That's right. Well, and growing up, I know that your father was tapped to be ambassador to Belgium when you were a teenager. How did living abroad in Europe, how did that sort of change your perspective in living and just life outside the U.S.?
Well, admittedly, I was 14 when my father had his choice between Pakistan and Belgium. And I was, of course, you know, I was much more worried about my friends in school, and, you know, I didn't want to leave everybody. And I was upset. I knew Pakistan was a country, but I asked him what country Belgium was in. You know, and he's kind of, it is a country, you know. And anyway, so they had to practically tie me and gag me to get me on the plane. But once I got there, I got bitten by the culture, and there's many different cultures in Belgium. It's definitely a dual culture, but there's plenty more. You know, they have 2 national languages and things like that. And it crossed me through the international door, and I've never gone back.
It's amazing how when you have a significant international experience at a very impressionable age, even as a teenager, you sort of see the world through a different lens, isn't it?
Yeah, I got equally as upset when he told me we were coming home. It was like, why? What did I do? You know? But yeah, they had to tie me and gag me to get me on the plane back.
In the introduction I gave, I talked about being a foremost citizen diplomat, and just so to establish some common ground, I've got a few pictures. If Michelle, if you can help me with the PowerPoint. When we talk about citizen diplomacy, we talk about folks maybe who aren't elected officials that go abroad just sort of as themselves, representing their country. I think many of you might remember this. This is the ping pong diplomacy of 1972, where the American team, we sent just some professional ping pong players to play with the Chinese team, and this was credited for opening up relations and thawing relations with China, to where President Nixon visited 2 months later, and history sort of started to change. And on the next, I think next slide you can see.
I understand Forrest Gump had a hand in that too.
That's right, Forrest Gump helped out. Yep. And on the next slide, This is someone that we all recognize.
I can't see who it is. Oh.
This is Fort Worth's own, of course, Van Cliburn, and the interesting story there was, it was 1958. He was competing in the first international Tchaikovsky competition, and he was, I believe, the only American in the competition, made it to the final round, and by that time, the judges had already decided they were going to give the award to their homegrown Russian pianist. So he played, he was the very first finalist to play. They gave him an 8-minute standing ovation after he finished, right? So the judges are kind of looking around, they weren't sure what to do. When all the finalists finished, the head judge went to Nikita Khrushchev and said, what do? We had our Russian guy, you know, we think he should win, but the people love Van Cliburn. And Nikita Khrushchev said, well, is he the best pianist? And the judges said, well, yeah, the American is the best. He said, well, then give him the prize. And that's kind of how it worked out. And, you know, he's credited for having, let's see, thawing a hole really in the relationship between the two countries that now, well, maybe now is not the best time to talk about Soviet relations.
Say 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. If anybody in here plays piano, there's a great competition in Russia we can send you to. And I know that there is another example of citizen diplomacy that everyone will recognize by the end of the story when your grandfather recruited some entrepreneurs to go down to Mexico. Could you share that with us?
Oh, sure. People to People went private when Granddad left office in 1961. And the first mission was actually, adult mission was in 1963. And my parents went, Bob Hope went, Walt Disney went, Arnold Palmer, and a broad array of entrepreneurs, as you refer to. And Disney was the one that was probably touched, at least the most visibly touched by the program. He came home and he wrote in his diary, he said, at first I didn't know about Ike and all this people-to-people stuff. And he said, but then I went to Mexico and I got the religion. And he went to Anaheim, California and wrote It's a Small World as a result of it. He'd never been out of the country before, so.
Which is, I think, the most played song in history. I think, really, I mean, literally, I think Disney, they totaled it up, and I think that's been played 252 million times, and that was just on the day that I was at Disneyland, I think. So, as you all probably know, I mentioned Nikita Khrushchev, and I know that last night we had talked, and you told a very interesting story about him, and I was wondering if you could share that with the club.
Sure. Well, you know, the backstory, the same year, 1958, was the year, looks like a lot of you might remember, when or maybe you heard from your parents or grandparents or something, I don't know. But it was the same year that he came to the UN and he gave a speech and he got so worked up that he, you know, banged his shoe on the podium. Meanwhile, Granddad, you know, had the people-to-people concept, you know, it was already in action, but one of the people-to-people things is homestays. And he used to bring heads of states to the farm so that they could see like an American family, you know, just kind of living as opposed to cities, you know, like New York and Washington and all that. And so Nikita Khrushchev, there were several of note that came. Winston Churchill was one, Charles de Gaulle was one, but Nikita Khrushchev was the one that actually affected my life tremendously. He came, and in tradition, he brought gifts for the family, and he gave my brother a Kennedy coloring book, which we thought was very interesting, and he gave the girls nest dolls, you know, the dolls that shrink, and we were actually assigned to the good room to play because Granddad wanted to take him into the flop room so that he'd, you know, relax. And I remember watching these two men who from behind actually kind of looked alike. You know, they both had the gray stripe. But anyway, they were arm in arm, and they go out onto the glassed-in porch, which is where we basically lived, and we were having a grand old time. Oh, I forgot to say, too, the Khrushchev gave us Soviet lapel pins, and of course we were very excited in putting them all on and all that, too. But anyway, all of a sudden, Granddad comes back blood red, and he scoops the gifts up, and he does this into Khrushchev and gives them back. And we were like, what? You know, I had never seen Granddad angry, not even when I misbehaved. So, you know, because I was a grandchild, I couldn't do anything wrong. And so it frightened me, but we put up enough of a fuss that we got it back. I still have the nest dolls. But on the way home, our property abutted the farm, but there was about a half a mile between the two houses. So my dad had driven that night, and I was in the back seat, and Mom and Dad were talking about what was said on the porch. And out of the corner of her eye, Mom saw the lapel pin on me. And she said, oh, the pins. And she made us take them off and throw them into the cow field in between the two houses. So if there's ever an archaeological dig in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, there's some lapel pins in a cow field. But I remember being very, you know, almost terrified of him. I thought, who is this person, you know, that made my grandfather so upset and, you know, I was really just scared of him. So if you fast forward to 1996, the People to People program asked me to come and speak on the heart and soul of People to People, and I had not been involved as an adult. But I thought, well, you know, I remember when they were trying to take it into the private sector, and I remember the conversations between my father and grandfather, and, you know, they probably want some granddad stories, which I've got a ton of. You know, yeah, I can do this. So I went out to Newport Beach, and the night before I was supposed to speak, a trustee grabbed me by the arm and said, Mary Jean, there's somebody here you have to meet. And he was, you know, across the room, and I recognized him right away because he looked just like his father. It was Sergei Khrushchev. And that moment of terror came back to me, and my heart fell to my feet, and I thought, you know, I knew how much Granddad loved People to People, and I thought, now, what is an organization that my grandfather cherished doing, putting me with somebody like him? You know, I had not been enlightened yet. And, but I was taught to be polite. So I stuck my hand out and introduced myself. And as soon as I did, he pulled me close to him and he said, my dear, I hope that you're not as uncomfortable as I am. And I started laughing, and we started telling just these awful jokes. I mean, you know, they were really corny and on both sides, I might add. But I walked away elated that I'd met one of the nicest people I'd ever met. And I went home and told my now ex-husband, and this is not why he's next, but I told him he was going to have to replace me at work because I dedicated my life to People, because it was like, now I know why they did that. And so ironically, through kind of personal diplomacy, if you will, not only did Sergei relieve my fears of the Russians, but he changed my life forever for the better. And he was the son of my grandfather's biggest adversary. So,
isn't that funny? And that really is, I think, the mission of People to People in sister cities, right? Is to bring people together. I mean, we look at Japan. You know, 70 years ago, we were bitter enemies, and we wanted to destroy each other. And now it's fair to say that, you know, there are 2,500 different sister cities around the world, and the two countries that have the strongest relationships are Japan and the U.S. So I think there's definitely a story of hope. I have to ask too. So the fact that heads of state would come and have dinner with you on your farm is just beyond my imagination. Were there any other significant people or heads of state that came when you were a kid that you can remember?
Well, there's kind of a chain of de Gaulle stories. He came to the farm, and it was kind of a progressive dinner that night. They came to our house for drinks, and then we all went to the grandparents for dinner. And when he came in, he had kind of an entourage. He had security, you know, one security, and then he had a translator. He wouldn't speak English, and his wife, and then Granddad had the same on his side. You know, I think the translator had to keep each other in check, right? And the room was filled up. You know, we didn't have that large of a living room, and I was the youngest of four, so all the older siblings got chairs before I did. And I walked in and I thought, oh, well, there's another one of Granddad's good friends. You know, I had no idea who he was, so I crawled up into his lap. And, you know, He was
French, so he might not have minded.
Yeah. So I was telling him all about, you know, I had on a little smock dress and all that, and I was telling him how you smock fabric, and I was giving him a little lesson in sewing and homemaking and that kind of thing, telling him, all about lace, and it was like I wasn't even in the room, and he had an interpreter that wasn't paying any attention either. So anyway, but he and my grandfather were discussing something, and Granddad handed him something to read, and he pulled out of his coat pocket one of the most thickest pair of glasses that I've ever seen, even since or before. And I immediately stopped talking about the lace, and I said, "Oh, why are your glasses so thick?" And in English, he goes, "Because I cannot see. Poor, poor me." The room goes silent, and everybody's going, "Okay, so what did we just say? He speaks English, But then if you go on to when my grandfather died, de Gaulle was the first person in any country to make their way to the funeral. Before the invitations even went out, he was already over the pond, and he went straight to the Capitol. And one of my favorite pictures is of him saluting Granddad's coffin. But he came to the Washington Hilton, which is where we were staying with my grandmother, and he walks in the room, and this is some years later, right? He pulls his glasses out of his same red-rimmed glasses out of his pocket, looks around the room, puts them back in, and tells my grandmother she has a beautiful family. And so then if you fast forward even one more, in 1990, when Granddad would have been 100, de Gaulle was born the same year. So de Gaulle would have been 100. So my father and I went to France, and Philippe de Gaulle, who both of them looked just like their fathers, except they were both taller than their fathers, but they were spitting images of their father. But they laid wreaths to each other's fathers at the Arc de Triomphe. And we went to a home where it's privately owned now, but it was where my grandparents lived when Granddad was stationed there with NATO. And Philippe and Daddy, the map room was still there. So they pulled out the map and they started going over all the strategies, and it was like watching two ghosts talking over, World War II, but they started talking about all the strategies. And sure enough, Philippe de Gaulle pulls out these glasses. They were thick and they were red-rimmed, and he puts them on and he goes, "Yeah, I think it was over there," and he puts it back in his pocket. So I've seen those glasses a lot.
You mentioned World War II, and and we know that your grandfather was the commander of the Allied forces in Europe, and I think your father graduated from West Point and joined him immediately, right?
Yes.
During World War II. What was that like? I mean, hearing them, hearing stories later about them talking about they were both assigned at the same place at the same time, weren't they?
Yeah, Daddy served as his aide, and I've often thought, that would be odd. But when you think about the position that Granddad was in, I mean, who can you implicitly trust? And it made sense. And my father, for example, about 3-4 years before he died, I said, "Well, you have the backstory. You've written books on this subject, but they're all superficial. They're academic." I said, you know, like what color their toothbrushes were and things like that. Why don't you just speak into a recorder so I can give it to the grandchildren someday? And it's just there. The personal stories are so important. And he looked at me rather indignantly and he said, "Because it's classified." And I said, "Yeah, but they're all dead." And he said, "It's still classified." And he took those stories to his grave. So that's a lot of integrity. But the one thing he did kind of spill to me one night, I think he was, shall we say, very relaxed. And he described, he'd been, I guess it was in Europe, he and Granddad were sharing quarters, and he'd been out kind of doing the town or whatever, in between bombings, I guess. And he came back in to their room, and it was completely dark, and he flipped the light switch, and Granddad was sitting there in the dark, and Granddad never took more than 1 or 2 drinks at a time, ever. But there was a whiskey bottle that was half empty next to him, and Daddy was just kind of shocked, and he said, "Are you all right?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." he said something far beyond comprehension. Any human comprehension is going to happen tomorrow, and I can't tell you what it is. And it was Hiroshima. So, I think that Daddy had kind of he handled it very well, but I think he had kind of a double post-traumatic stress, if that makes sense. So, and that's why it took him being very relaxed to tell me the story.
Your grandfather was born not too far from here in Denison, Texas. There is actually a little house.
Woohoo!
Right. Half the population of Denison is here with us today, apparently.
That's great. Oh, I heard all three clap. Yeah.
All three, that's right. How closely related are you? Do you still go there? Who maintains that house, and how? I know you pass through Texas sometimes, but can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. The house is owned by the state of Texas. It's a state park, and I was there probably about 3-4 months ago, and I'm going back on Granddad's birthday this year, October 14th, so you'll come to Denison. But it's maintained by the park, and it was kind of interesting. Should I tell that? Yeah, okay. It's kind of interesting. I'm also with the Eisenhower Foundation, and it had, at one point it was kind of facing some trials financially, and so a friend of mine who knows Ross Perot called Mr. Perot and asked him for some support, and he said, well, I think I've done enough Eisenhower this year. And we didn't know what he was talking about, but he walked into the birthplace and he saw that it was in disrepair, and he asked about it, and they said, well, the budget had been cut and they couldn't maintain it. And he, on the spot, hired people and completely restored the birthplace. So I guess he had it, and he had not been thanked by any family members, but, we didn't know. So, it was kind of, but it's wonderful how people will sometimes do such nice things with, without any, there was no thanks, there was no acknowledgement or anything, but he just did it. So I've always admired Mr. Perot for doing that, and I sure hope he'll give to the foundation someday.
So Ross, if you're watching,
yeah,
let us know. We have a question here. Someone that said, I always loved your grandmother Mamie. Do you have a favorite story about her?
There's so many. We could be here all day if I get started on her. She was my mentor. She was my best friend. She was everything to me. She and my father and I were all very close. I think maybe one story that was kind of interesting. I was in my senior year. I was in a Fiddler on the Roof, a play. I played a peasant. Anyway, so she was going to come and watch me because it was close to graduation and all that, and she was going to come and watch me in Fiddler on the Roof, and she was going to go to graduation as well. And the teacher that was directing the play caught wind that Mamie Eisenhower was coming, and he said, "Oh, at the intermission, I'm gonna give her roses, and I'm gonna do this and that and the other thing." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, this is, it's my night, And I didn't say anything, but I did warn her. I said, be prepared because I think that they're going to make quite a fuss, in intermission. And she said, you know what, I don't think I can go. And instead, she invited the teacher over to my parents' house for tea, but she wouldn't go to the school and have them make a fuss over her and not me. So, that's how sweet she was.
That's great. We've got another question, family-related question, if you don't mind sharing. This is, what was the personal relationship between your granddad and Richard Nixon?
Interesting. I think that it was pretty much, until my brother married Nixon's daughter, it was pretty much a political relationship, and then it became maybe more up close and personal once Julie came into the picture. She's the sweetest person in the world, and you talk about a natural diplomat, she's it. I remember at the, I don't know, he kind of personalized to the whole family, let's say, when that union took place. He was a very complex man, and I know that when he was campaigning for president in '68, of course, Granddad died in '69, and the last year of his life was riddled with health problems, his heart mainly. And I think that Nixon probably got his feelings a little bit hurt that Granddad wouldn't come out and endorse him, but he literally didn't have the energy. And my grandmother, asked them not to ask, basically. But finally, towards the end, Granddad did endorse him. They put this footage of him, I've seen it, it's not very exposed, but they put a jacket on him, and he'd lost so much weight that the jacket was, super big, and they literally propped him up, and he made it an on-film endorsement because, he didn't want Nixon to not understand, and he did care enough about him to do that. So I think that says that they were close, but maybe not visibly, if that makes sense.
And thank you for being so open to some very personal stories. I wanted to save time for one final question. This was about Rotary. I know you have been to over 100 countries, and I'm sure you've seen some of the great work that Rotary has done around the world. Can you share with us some things maybe you've seen firsthand in other countries that have been Rotary sponsored?
Well, actually, I was heavy duty into the humanitarian eradication of landmines. What better bridge is there? It doesn't matter where you're from. If you step on a mine, you lose your leg, I was in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was a red country when we went in, and we left it a green country. But who was there side by side with us but Rotary? And I was really surprised. But there was a group, and they were just as passionate as we were. And so we actually did some fields together, not officially. In other words, but we got more done together, let's put it that way. And I always admired Rotary because it's a slightly different mission than People to People, but on that one we really had a common thread. And the other is the eradication of polio is something that that's very near and dear to my heart because I'm one of the 2% that got their vaccines back in the 50s. I hate to. Well, you already outed me when you said I was born in his first term. But anyway, so I'm old.
That's going to be in the roast.
Anyway, I caught polio from the vaccine. So it's very near and dear to me that Rotary is making the effort to completely eradicate it from the world. Nobody will ever, by vaccine or by accident or anything like that, by mosquito or whatever, they won't have to suffer with that. So, Rotary's tops in my book.
Our mission is service above self, and your organization, People to People, does wonderful things. On the screen, there's a link to the website, PTPI, for People to People International. If you want to just talk briefly about what your organization does, who can get involved, and if members are interested in more information, what are some of your bread and butter programs?
Okay, we have members that span from age 10 to 92, so it's all age groups. It's hard to specifically say what we do because we have a very broad mission, and we do that to enable ourselves to take on more because, you can't go outside your purpose with a 501c3. The elevator speeches, we do humanitarian, cultural, and educational exchanges outside governments. In fact, Granddad even said the people want peace, and they want peace so badly that the governments are going to have to step aside and let them have it. So it's very grassroots. And I'd say the lion's share of our activity is student exchange, but there's a lot of adult missions as well. And every mission that we send, to me, I've insisted that it has the three-pronged part of our mission: humanitarian, cultural, and educational, all of it. So it was kind of funny because there was kind of I'd say maybe sheltered is a nice word for it, but there was a delegation They were all obviously very wealthy and used to having people do things for themselves, and I made them work the food bank in Egypt. And one of them came up to me and said, I've never had to do this before. And I said, well, that's good. And she just kind of looked at me and rolled her eyes and walked off. But anyway, I think it's important to not only leave a thumbprint when you're there, but to understand that what you bring home is so much more valuable than anything you could leave. So, yeah, that's kind of the elevator speech. Now let me get into the details. Now, I got all afternoon.
Well, and if you're interested in more information about how citizen diplomacy or any of these great organizations, we encourage you to look up People to People International. We've got a great chapter of sister cities here in Fort Worth, and our International Services Committee here at Rotary. We're taking a group to Swaziland this fall. If you'd like to get involved, come see me or Greg Wexler, who's the chair of the committee. Mary, it's such an honor to have you here, and I know you said you'd be gracious enough to stick around for a few minutes before we have to head to the airport, but...
Yes. And I do want to say something about the Swaziland program. I went to Morocco, and they did the same thing they're going to do in Swaziland with the wheelchairs. And that was just an amazing thing to see people who had never been able to get around, get into the wheelchair. The looks on their faces and things like that. I mean, if anybody here can go, I would highly recommend it, because it just... like I say, you take home a whole lot more than you leave.
Please help me thank Mary Jean Eisenhower.